Station. Morning?
Morning.
Might be. It is. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another meeting of the Infrastructure and Land Use Committee of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. Introductions, how do our chair and co-chair want to begin here?
Well, why don't you say who you are?
Yeah, I'm Brian Levine with the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. I'm Vice President of Government Affairs.
Well, great. Then we'll take it over if that's okay. And then what we always do at these, we do introductions so everyone can know who's in the room and who's online. And it'll be very helpful, as we were saying before, this is the most number of speakers we've had. We normally have 1 to 2, in a rare circumstance, 3, but this is fantastic because we're getting the critical mass of brain power from the planning department here.
The brain trust.
Okay, the brain trust. You see, this is a cultural reference referring to the advisors to Franklin Roosevelt when he took office in 1933. That was the brain trust. That's what they were called. We now have the modern version.
Right in this room.
90 years later, the
They're
new
going
brain
to
trust.
save the county's land use, infrastructure,
There you go.
growth and infrastructure policy.
So anyway, what we do is we have this meeting that runs to no later than 10 o'clock. After introductions of everybody, then we turn it over to you all, the speakers. We would like, in all seriousness, if you could just tell us, because we'd be very interested, when did you come to Park and Planning and what were you doing before? Whether you were in school, in government, some other place, it's always interesting to us to know. It's great to know how long you've been there, but then what were you doing before? And then what we do is we open it up to questions, commentary, conversation, basically with you all, again, ending it by 10 o'clock. And we really appreciate you all being here this morning. My name's Gus Bauman, of the law firm of Beveridge and Diamond, and I chair this meeting with Bob, who will introduce himself, and the president of the chamber is here. She'll introduce herself. We'll do the people in the room, then we'll turn to everyone online, and then we'll turn it over to Robert and the group you've gathered together to talk about this topic, which is of great interest to the county chamber.
I'm Bob Elliott. I'm the co-chair of the Land Use and Infrastructure Committee, Gus's sidekick. And,
Who's Batman and who's Robin?
Oh, I'm definitely Robin in this one. I'm taking it. There's no way I can possibly live up to being Batman in this case. I'm not even going to try.
In that case,
just so we're clear,
you could be the Lone Ranger. You could be the Lone Ranger. I'll be Tonto.
Okay. So we've got a fair swap here. Anyway, Bob Elliott with Land Chain Development. We're a small privately held real estate company that does a lot of work here in Montgomery County. And
very good. Good morning, everybody. I'm Gigi Godwin, President and CEO of the Chamber, and it's such a pleasure to host you today. We're excited to hear what you have to say. And with that, I would then suggest we go to the screen. Have everybody introduce themselves.
Start with Casey.
I'm just experimenting with my new car connection here. Bear with me. Casey Anderson.
We hear you.
I'm Casey. I work for Rogers Consulting.
Great.
I've been here this many years.
And then let's go to Lowell.
Good morning, Lowell Yoder, M&T Bank.
All right. And then we have Steve Robbins.
Good morning, Steve Robbins with Lurcher and Brewer. I was a former chair of the chamber and many years ago also chaired this committee. Welcome to everyone from Park and Planning.
Great.
Lowell is also a former chair of the board.
Yes. Monica.
Good morning, everyone. Monica Marquina, and I have the pleasure of being the Director of Government Affairs for WCC Water. Great to be here.
Great, thanks. Izzy?
Good morning, Fizi Halim. I'm with Montgomery College Workforce Development and Continuing Education, and I'm the Business Solutions Manager. Nice to be here.
Easy.
Stuart?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Stuart Barr, zoning attorney with Lurch, Shirley and Brewer. Thanks to all the planning department officials for taking the time to join us this morning and provide the update. We appreciate it.
And Susan?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Susan Madden, Montgomery College. Great to be here today. Thank you.
Great. So that's everybody in the sort of the private sector through the chamber. So we'll come back into the room, and you want to start? Should we start with David or Robert, or will we go down the table? Let's go down the table.
You wanted some history. So David Ansbacher, I started at the planning department in 2009. I worked on the Purple Line, the bus rapid transit plan, project manager for the bicycle master plan. I was a co-project manager for the complete streets design guide. Before coming to park and planning, I was in the Peace Corps in Paraguay in South America in the late 90s, early 2000s, and grad school at UNC, and then worked in private industry, DHB, for 5 years.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Robert Cronenberg. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning, and thank you for hosting us today. So I'm on year 24 with Park and Planning. I feel like I've been a utility player for 24 years with the commission, just like everyone else, I think, does, and you get to experience quite a few things. I had about 10 years of private sector experience with land use planning firms before I came to Park and Planning. So that's my history.
Lisa Cavoni, I'm the housing planner. And the acting planning supervisor. I've been at planning for almost 9 years now. Before this, I was working in state government, working on housing policy, like the qualified allocation plan for LIHTC, a lot of research in the housing data for the state of Delaware.
And then I guess online, who do we have? We have Jesus.
Oh, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. We don't hear you.
Sorry, forgot. Is this better?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I raised my mouthpiece. So I'm Jesus Beck, schools planner on the GIP team. I've been with the planning department. This is year 5. Previous to this, I guess I was an architect turned full-time stay-at-home mom. I realized that wasn't the best fit. So I went back to grad school at UMD and then came to the planning department.
Right. And then Darcy?
Hi, yes, Darcy Buckley, transportation planner with Countywide Planning. I've been with planning for, I guess, a little over a year now. And before I joined planning, I spent about 10 years in county government, first in the office of the county executive, and then in the MCDOT director's office most of that time.
Which office of county executive? Which executive?
Leggett.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, during his last term.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, Brian?
That's it.
Anyone sign in since?
Nope.
No, that's it. And just full disclosure, we were asked, and I served on the stat group, saw Lisa, Jesus, and others in action. I was just a fly on the wall, really, for that. But maybe they'll talk a little bit about that group and the outcomes of that as well. So
great.
Great partnership, I think.
Good. Well, so we would love to hear about what the new policy is going to be. And it would be helpful for those who aren't into this deeply, if you could just also explain the process going from you to the board to the council, how all that will work out in the schedule, to the extent that you all know it today. Thank you.
Darcy, can you share your screen from there, the PowerPoint?
Or I can, it's up to you.
Or what would be easier?
Yes, I can do that.
Yeah.
Let me know if you have any issues. You want me to share, or are you almost there?
Unmute.
Darcy, we can't hear you.
Here, it's probably something on our end. Let me share mine.
Sorry, can you, okay, I think I had it, but, okay, well, you have
Okay,
it.
we've got it. Thank you.
Darcy, do you want me to kick it off or you?
Oh, why don't you go ahead and do it?
Sure. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. Just a little bit of an introduction to the growth and infrastructure policy. So Montgomery Planning initiates an update of the county's growth and infrastructure policy every 4 years. So that's what we're doing right now. We must transmit our draft of the growth and infrastructure policy to the county council by August 1st. We're currently in the middle of work sessions with the planning board right now. And the county council adopts the policy, but they must adopt it by November 15th, 2024. So after we transmit the policy to the county council, they will have their own public hearing, and then we'll enter into work sessions with committee and then the full council. And really the foundation of the growth and infrastructure policy is that we must have adequate infrastructure to support our growth. And you know, it's kind of, I think it's a really interesting policy because it does a lot. And I don't think that people really realize it. It's a policy that we think is really instrumental in helping advance the county goals like racial equity and social justice, housing for all, economic development. And so today we want to walk through some of our preliminary, staff's recommendations that will really serve as, as a starting board for the planning board and their work sessions. We've had 2 work sessions on schools and transportation, and then we're going to have one on impact taxes next week, and then we'll revisit some of those recommendations that we had to go back to with the planning board. So next slide. And just a really quick history of the policy. And so, during the 1980s and the 1990s, development was booming in the county, but most of the development was greenfield in this context. And that greenfield development really necessitated a policy that focused on creating new capacity. The focus was on ensuring that roads and schools were in place as farmland was converted into neighborhoods. And the county has, obviously since then evolved from a bedroom community into a complex jurisdiction with major employment centers and mature residential neighborhoods. And today our growth is largely through infill development or redevelopment. And over the time, the policy has really shifted to respond to the county's that changing growth context from greenfield development to infill development. And these, every 4-year updates, they really give us a chance to hone our tools and ensure that the policy is helping the county to achieve its goals. Next slide.
We're testing Gus's knowledge here.
The photograph? Where's that photograph? It looks like Silver Spring. Yeah, I was just wondering if it's.
It looks like the Falklands on the, with the.
Yeah, I think.
No?
I was thinking Wheaton, but you're right. That is Silver Spring, I think, with the Falklands to the left. Yeah,
I found this. I found this one in our archives, but I can't remember. Where it is.
One suggestion would always be if you have the date and location, because the people who know these things sit there and just start staring at the screen, going, okay, "Where are we?"
Lesson learned.
Robert, he's like, just as long as we have Robert with us, we'll know.
I love these photos.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right. So about the growth and infrastructure plan a little bit more. It directs the planning board's administration of the adequate public facilities requirements, which states the planning board may only approve a proposed development after determining that the surrounding infrastructure like schools, roads, and sidewalks can meet the needs of new residents, visitors, and students. And the GIP guides how the planning board makes the determination by setting standards for evaluating public infrastructure and the impact that development may have on it. And it also outlines how a developer can bring infrastructure up to standards so a project can proceed. Then next slide. So Ms. Beck is going to talk a little bit more about the schools element, but just, schools the schools element is a major part of the growth and infrastructure policy, along with transportation. And for schools, each residential development application is evaluated to forecast its demand for school facilities and to determine if and how the applicant will mitigate inadequacies. Next slide.
Wait, Lisa, could you go back to the prior? There you go. Can you just can you tell us what the blue areas are signifying on this picture?
Sure. Ms. Hayes is going to go into a little bit more detail. So this map is of the school impact areas of the county. So in 2020, major shift is that similar to the transportation policy areas, which we'll talk about on the next slide, we divided the county up into three school impact areas. We had infill, which is the blue or the indigo, the turnover or the tan on the map, and then there was greenfield, which we have none on this map because we're not experiencing greenfield development. And what that does is it kind of signifies the growth context of these parts of the county. So in the blue areas, we have infill development where we're largely seeing a lot of development, but not a lot of students being generated from that. And then the turnover, we're seeing not a lot of housing growth, but we are seeing but limited, but high, the school enrollment growth was largely from turnover of existing homes. That has changed since that, given that MCPS's enrollment was stagnant. It's rebounding a little bit. And again, Jesus, we'll talk about this in a little bit more, but it's just a way that we divide the county up for, and it also sets the impact taxes. So the blue areas have lower impact taxes because they're generating less students. The tan areas have higher impact taxes generally by type because they are generating more children. They have higher student generation rates.
Okay, thank you.
Fine. And then for transportation, Darcy, feel free to jump in, but each proposed development forecasts its impacts and evaluates surrounding infrastructure to determine if and how it will mitigate its impact. Darcy, you want to talk about transportation policy areas really quickly?
Sure. The county is divided into 40 odd, I think we have 42 right now, transportation policy areas. And each of those are, based on often master planning areas, but each of those is given a color, either red, orange, yellow, or green. And those areas, mainly they determine the rate for impact taxes that are paid, which is a one-time fee paid at the building permit stage of development that goes towards countywide infrastructure.
This map set, or is this map evolve every 4 years?
This map evolves every 4 years. What we're looking at here is actually the
Thrive map. This is a CIP map.
It's not a Thrive map, but you do have the.
We have the Thrive. So one of the big changes, and Darcy will talk about this more, is we try to align our policy areas with our Thrive.
That's what I was asking. So,
Yeah.
this is an active map that could evolve. It's not a Thrive map. This is something where if policy shifts or if something comes online, this map could change.
Yes, and the map we're looking at.
Slides, you'll see those changes.
The map we're looking at here is the 2020 GIP version, and you'll see on later slides the changes we're recommending.
Okay, and like just curiosity, so at the top of the yellow/orange is what? That Germantown, Clarksburg, what's at the top of the count? Where? That's Clarksburg. So that's the rest of that green is between Clarksburg to the county line.
Where the green would be the ag reserve, it looks like.
Well, no, but north of it, while there's technically developed, that's not ag reserve, but it's just, there's nothing really. There's no on ramps, there's no ways to.
No, there isn't.
That's what I was asking.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Right. But I mean, generally, and the red seems to be largely, not entirely around metro or MARC stations.
That's
Is
correct.
that aligned with sort of red zone policy?
And the purple line, it looks like, on the lower part, maybe. So red is sort of focused, generally speaking. We understand that this is not 100%, but red seems to be around transits, rapid transit stops of MARC, Metro, Purple Line, and that this will change over time, right?
Yes, historically, the red policy areas were around the metro stations, and places with either with planned or existing kind of premium transit. And it's, diverged from that a bit. Now we're really trying to line it up with areas that we consider to be downtowns in our master plan of highways typology. Whereas orange areas are places with slightly less dense development that might not have premium transit today, but it is planned for. And those are our town centers.
Okay. All right. And one last quick question while we're on this, and maybe you're going to take it up later. The county's plans for the future bus rapid transit lines, do they show up now on your 4-year draft, or are you thinking that's beyond 4 years, so you're not going to show that now?
No, so we have this, it's a little tricky to see on this map, but if you see kind of those white kind of grayish lines that are snaking out, those are existing and planned premium transit. So that includes our BRT lines.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, yes. So very quickly, water and sewer services is considered adequate if the subdivided property is planned to be serviced within 2 years, as outlined in the county's 10-year water and sewer plan. And police, fire, and health facilities are assumed adequate unless the appropriate agency identifies a problem, which never happens.
Right, right.
Next slide. Just, very quickly, the council adopted GIP establishes the broad rules for defining adequacy, and the GIP is then implemented through subject-specific guidelines approved by the planning board. The first is something that Jesus works on. It's the annual school test that evaluates the projected capacity utilizations of the county's public school facilities and establishes adequacy status for each school service area as outlined in the GIP. And the local area transportation guidelines, they detail the rules and procedures for completing the transportation adequacy test.
Is that the LATR, is that now the only transportation test / tax? Is there no longer what used to be the policy area? You had to do a 2-part, you had to do local and policy and pass both. Is it now strictly one test?
That's
under
correct.
The current plan.
That's correct. It's it's just the local area.
The one caveat is this is for off-site mitigation. There are tests separate tests that are defined separately from the growth and infrastructure policy for site access.
Right, on-site direct.
Right.
Right, thank you.
Slide. And go to the next slide.
I'm
jumping into the.
Sorry, I think I can screen. I think I can do screen share now. So I was going to take the opportunity to do that because I have it all set up now. We have some complicated things later. Okay.
It's good.
Great. Continue.
Can you go to the slide 10?
That would be helpful.
Very quickly, when we were looking at the 2024 update, we looked at a variety of things. And, one of the big things that we wanted to do is we wanted to review the performance of the past GIP to study its effectiveness. And we collect data, we completed analysis. We had 2 work groups, the STAT Schools Technical Advisory Group and the Transportation Advisory Group, to work through understanding issues with the past GIP. How can we hone our tools to make it more effective? And then always part of the GIP is considering the county's current growth trends, and that we do a deep dive into demographics, the forecasting. How has the county changed in the past 4 years? How has the county changed since the beginning of the GIP to better understand the growth context? And then, of course, we wanted to make the policy implementation clearer and more efficient. And when we walk through, we're going to only walk through like some of our big recommendations, but you'll see that what we tried to do is, we tried to respond to, concerns that we heard. We heard that there's a lot of boundaries related to this policy. It can be a little complicated at times. So our goal was to make it simpler and more efficient. And then, we also review development impact taxes. That's not necessarily part of the GIP, but it's so closely related that we generally always make recommendations. And then we also wanted to align the policy with updated county priorities. Since the last GIP, we've adopted, Thrive Montgomery 2050. We have a climate action plan. We have the Racial Justice and Social Equity Act. So we wanted to make sure that we were responding to all of those things, all of those big transformative plans in the GIP. Next slide. And then the recommendations in the GIP, we wanted to make sure that the GIP was aligned with the county priorities. And we identified the priorities here on the screen: racial equity and social justice, economic competitiveness, environmental resilience, compact growth, housing for all, safety, and good governance. And then, to give a little bit of an overview, the policy really aims to ensure adequacy while improving development conditions in the county. We want to enhance predictability, transparency, proportionality in the approval process, and we want to stimulate the production of much-needed housing and commercial in the county.
So if you could, please, what is meant by proportionality?
So it's
Becky, you want to?
yes, certainly. So with the growth and infrastructure policy, the goal is to assess conditions and to see whether it can support growth. And if it can't, then the proposed development is asked to mitigate. And the goal here is to make sure that that our requirements are proportional to, in line with, appropriate for the project's actual impact. So making sure that we're not having requirements that are kind of out of line with the impact.
Okay, thank you.
And Gus, that's going to be primarily off-site. So you still have your on-site facilities for adequacy that you have to provide, but what she's talking about is primarily off-site.
Okay, great.
I think Sue, we're going to jump in. She's going to talk about two big recommendations for schools, then we'll move on to transportation and impact factors.
Right, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so for schools, I mean, we did a major overhaul 4 years ago, so we're not looking into revamp the whole thing again. We're mostly focusing on honing in the tools that we've introduced last time. And the first of that is the school impact area boundaries, as Lisa introduced earlier. When we first introduced them, we drew our own boundaries based on census tracts. But this time around, we're trying to simplify things for applicants, community members to understand the GIP. So we're modifying those boundaries so that they align with what the transportation policy is proposing for their boundaries. And we can do our own analysis again of the data to classify each geographic unit drawn by these boundaries into infill, turnover, or greenfield areas. Again, infill impact areas are where we're seeing high housing growth, predominantly multifamily, that tends to generate less students per unit. Turnover impact areas where there's not much housing growth or activity, and the enrollment trends are mostly dependent on the turnover of existing homes. And then greenfield impact areas is where we're seeing high housing growth that's predominantly single family units. And therefore, there's a huge impact on school enrollment due to new development. So if we go to the next slide, I mean, this is just a simple diagram.
Could I just ask a quick question, please? Sure. So the school impact area boundaries, that's not the same then as the cluster boundaries for the high school, middle school, elementary school clusters. This is a different boundary, right?
Correct.
And what's the relationship between that and, the cluster boundaries that we have to abide by when you're proposing new development? You have to focus on, are we in the Blair cluster, the Whitman cluster, that? I mean, can you just explain for a moment that the difference between these two?
That's actually a very good question, because that I guess we still have a separate boundary that we can't ignore, but at the same time, I mean, the one reason we're not using those boundaries is because we're trying to develop our policy around housing and enrollment growth context. And the school boundaries, especially when it gets to the cluster level, they're so large. it contains all different types of growth contexts within the same school service area. So for when, if you understand the utilization premium payments, which we assess on development applications when a school is considered overutilized, overcrowded, in other words, for the development to come in, that's when those boundaries matter. Because I mean, I guess when we're addressing this issue, it's less of a boundary issue. If you just know which schools are serving the application, the unit, that's what determines whether this application will have a UPP or not. The rate that this UPP, utilization premium payment, or even the school impact tax, which any residential development at market rate will have to pay, is determined by these boundaries. So whether it's a infill impact area, turnover impact area, greenfield impact areas theoretically, but we're not proposing any greenfield impact areas, but those determine the actual rate of, let's say, even if you're building a single family detached home, for the same single family detached home, whether you're in an infill impact area or turnover impact area, the rates are different. So that's where these boundaries come into play. And then the other thing, when we're calculating the enrollment impact of the development on a school, in other words, when we're trying to estimate how many kids are going to come out of this project, the student generation rates we calculate separately for infill and turnover and greenfield if we had greenfield. So those numbers will come out differently as well for like a multifamily low rise, where we're seeing quite a difference between infill and turnover, whether development proposal is in an infill impact area and turnover impact area. Our estimates will come out differently. We'll say if you're in an infill impact area, let's say you're going to generate 10 students. If that project were in a turnover impact area with the same amount of units, same housing type, the calculation come out as maybe 15 or more students. I'm making up the numbers right now, but that's where these impact areas boundaries matter. So this shows a diagram of how we've analyzed.
I don't get it. I got to tell you, is this something new, or have we been doing this for a while?
The school impact area?
Yeah.
Only since 2020.
Since 2020. I got to tell you, maybe it's just me, but ever since 1986, we invented this thing by legislation, and the first annual growth policy was done. And so this all goes back to 86, everything. The schools, it was always, at least you could tell a developer coming in from out of town, all you got to know is the high school cluster boundary. And then what's the high school, what are the middle schools, what are the elementary schools? That drives what you're going to have to pay if you want to build housing in that school cluster. This now adds a new layer, which maybe it's me, but I find this incredibly confusing, and I don't understand then how we use the cluster boundaries and this, and how I just find this confusing to me.
I want to add something to what Gus is saying, which is I think how Gus and I met in the first place, where you and Barbara and I all met 1,000 years ago, which is around cluster boundaries, and heaven help the person that tries to change them. So I'm having what prevails here? I'm having a paper covers rock moment. I want to know which rule knocks out the other one. Which one, how do you decide? Who decides and how do they decide which set of rules, the school boundaries, where, people make investments in houses and then ultimately get involved in local politics and everything else.
I'm not getting wrong, I understand Gus's comment. Sounds like there's a map and a map, right? So there's two different maps. There's the school cluster map, and then there's a development-related map. And then the other piece to layer on this, and it's not your all's doing, is the fact that you don't control the school board, or the school board is controlled independently, and therefore this idea about moving boundaries and this and that gets into this next layer of who's making that decision, because you could find yourself in an impacted area or wanting to make a change in something only to discover that you are, and I know your goal is to try to make it so that no one is negatively impacted, right? I think so what you're trying to do is sort of fix maybe some of these issues. I'm see you as a fixer, not as a problem creator in this, but I think the challenge becomes there may be opportunities to solve problems that you all can't solve alone, that requires, you know, the school, the board, and of course, citizens who are going to be irate when you tell them your kids are now going here, not there, and, you know, the growth of the county isn't necessarily sitting within where the different schools the children maybe should or shouldn't go, if that makes sense.
And I think one point of clarification, Gus, that might help here.
Yeah.
Is that before 2020, there were moratoriums, in fact, you know, that could go into effect. And that was really a big part of the clusters that were established, you know, from the high school to the middle school to the elementary schools. And those moratoriums were really geared at the clusters in terms of how, you know, the boundaries, and that was all MCPS driven.
Right.
But it was development driven as we were evaluating the student generations, you know, to those clusters. In 2020, the moratoriums were,
We got rid of
we
them.
got rid of them.
Thank God.
And so, yes, and I think that was a
Oh,
great
yeah.
thing. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
you know, in terms of the other question about kind of the other boundary here, I think that was what you were trying to understand, right?
Right.
And maybe, Jesus, can you?
Yes, yes.
I think, you know, the clusters that are MCPS driven, those are not changing unless MCPS changes. And we're not doing anything like that.
Okay.
Correct,
So,
correct.
I'll let-
And I guess a simple way to understand it, especially when we compare it to the moratorium, is this. So if during the moratorium, the school cluster or, you know, like the school boundaries were deciding whether your development can come in or not. That's what we've replaced with utilization premium payments. We're not saying a development cannot come in. Instead, we're saying if the school is too overcrowded, then you will have to pay to come in. But like another layer we added to that is, let's say the Bethesda Chevy Chase cluster. Is this downtown Bethesda, or is this way out, you know, pretty much very suburban area, Bethesda Chevy Chase? The growth context of where the development is coming in is different. So we're charging the developers differently based on the growth context of the developer. The school service area will tell you whether you have to pay or not. Impact area will tell you how much you have to pay.
Yeah, Gus, this is Steve. The clusters, the way to sort of think about this is the clusters are all remaining the same. And the example of Bethesda is a really good one. Within the cluster, when they drill down, there can be different areas, like right in the heart of Bethesda, the CBD would be a infill area. But as you get into sort of the BCC area outside of the CBD, you might be in a turnover area, all within what you were calling the BCC cluster. So it's just within the area. That's what you're looking at to determine, frankly, how much you pay.
Sliding into Bethesda,
Yeah,
Potomac, right? You can be in Bethesda, halfway
it's
between
not-
Bethesda and Potomac.
The key point is it's not that complicated because you just have to know where your project is. You don't need to understand the formula, right? They're explaining to you how they got to these areas, but it's actually not that confusing. All you got to know is where's the property you want to develop. So don't get distracted by all this explanation. It was important to do to justify getting rid of the moratorium and deriving like a rate for these payments. But as far as what it means for somebody who wants to build something, it's actually very straightforward.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Casey.
Very helpful.
Okay, then should we move on?
Yeah, let's go to the next recommendation.
Yeah. So this is just a list of the results that we got from redoing the analysis based on the boundaries. So on the left, under infill impact areas are the areas that we are proposing to become infill impact area during the 2024-2028 GIP. And on the right are the turnover impact areas. If you note, some of them are bolded and say over right. That's where our data, like doing the whole index analysis where we got different results, but based on our policy priorities, we are overriding those results. For example, the purple line the impact areas surrounding purple lines are usually coming out as turnover, but we're switching them over to infill based on what we're trying to, incentivize in those areas.
Right. So just so I'm clear, so if it's bold and in the blue column, it's moving to
From
bold,
turnover
but if
to
it's
infill.
bold
Yes.
If it's bolded in the gold zone, it's moving to blue.
So the
Right?
bolded.
So I'm looking at Clarksburg, for example. Clarksburg shows that it's gold. It says Clarksburg East and Clarksburg West is bolded, but then I look at Clarksburg and Clarksburg looks blue.
So those two are actually different. So those two came out as greenfield based on our results, but for a few reasons, we decided that we'll keep it as turnover. One reason is one of those areas did not see any new development in the past 5 years. So for us to practically calculate a student generation rate to use for future development, it's kind of unreliable. And even when we combine the two, the other one did see some development. The number of property records that we have in there is so low that every time a developer comes in with maybe a slightly, big proposal, big project, the next time we calculate student generation rates, it's going to keep swinging like based on what we saw like most recently. So we're combining that with turnover impact area to sort of, have a thicker pool of property records to calculate student generation rates based on and keep them more stable.
But hey, Sue, I think what he's asking is, and I think you answered this, Clarksburg East and Clarksburg West were not in infill impact areas. They were in green?
Correct. They would have been, yes,
Okay,
they would have shown up as purple on this map, which we don't have.
Center is blue. So I guess I'm now saying, so the blue is actually Clarksburg Town Center is blue. And so,
correct.
Is it safe then to say that beyond was there anything beyond Clarksburg? So everything, you're basically, there's no greenfield any longer in the county.
Correct.
We're saying that, so like out towards Poolsville, there's no greenfields any longer. It's everything is now hitting turnover level.
There might be,
Correct.
instances of projects that were like, that are, greenfield type of projects, but they're far and large between that area is more context. Its development context is more infill and redevelopment than greenfield.
Well, by the way, I'm good with that conceptually. I just wanted to be clear because the only one that seems like, at least on your list, is Clarksburg, but it doesn't, to me, I don't see Poolsville on the list, and it strikes me that should Poolsville ever experience, some sort of growth, that would again almost imply in the same way that it moved from greenfield to turnover, so we're calling it turnover, right? But it doesn't show up on that list. So I guess that's why I was asking why Poolsville, for example, doesn't show up as a blue or in your gold column, but not bolded. Is that right? It's not there?
Yes. I mean, a lot of this is
Or it's
based
not
on
there.
percentages of what we're seeing in the data, percentage of new homes, percentage of single family homes, percentage of units in the pipeline. And for Poolsville, that's where it's not coming out as purple. I mean, if you look at the boundary, it's capturing a large area. So there might be small pockets of where we're seeing new development with, a good amount of units, but as a percentage overall, when we look at the whole area, and we compare to the rest of the county, I mean, especially places like Clarksburg is where they are sort of, reducing the impact of new development in Poolsville comparatively.
The only thing I would say just empirically is it strikes me as unusual that Clarksburg is showing up as greenfield and Poolsville is not, given their locations, given their school districts, et cetera. Because to me, all of Clarksburg, I'm not saying there's clearly a difference between infill and turnover, but to sit there and suggest the fact that everything has gone greenfield, and candidly, I'm just picking on Poolsville because it's sitting in the ag reserve, but areas up towards Damascus or even East County to me strike me in the same way. I'm picking on Poolsville only because it just.
Right. One thing to also notice, like we didn't walk through all of the data that was used, but part of this is based on residential capacity analysis. And Poolsville, we looked at their zoning code, and there's not a lot of capacity left there, and so that was a big part of it. There's also not a lot of pipeline there. So there's a whole bunch of data that goes into why.
No,
I know you're just making a point, but like Jesus said, it's based on percentages and averages of a very large area. So there might be projects that are more.
I'd be speaking to the fringes, right? I'm speaking the edge, I'm speaking the edges of Howard and Frederick and what have you. It just strikes me that a lot of that is still really fringy, like Greenfield, as compared to anything along the 270 corridor. You even get to that sort of like weird next. That's why I was asking about that green zone earlier, like between the end of Clarksburg and all the way to the county line, which the only reason it's not developing is because it's kind of a tweener between Frederick and Montgomery County. And it's like, okay, what do you do here?
Your point, right?
Yeah.
Could I just offer, just among ourselves, just a community relations and political suggestion about when we have a map that looks like that? When we show a few highways, which is fine. It's great the way you've got it. But for Damascus way up there and Poolsville way out there, I suggest we just show the state highway that does run from the 355 Clarksburg area up to Damascus, that state highway, that we just show that there is a physical state highway connection, so Damascus doesn't look, because the folks up there often feel like when we do maps that we sort of put them in an island like they're Crimea, and then we ignore them. We just ignore them, and the proof of the pudding is we don't even show a highway connection up. And my other suggestion is the same thing, showing the state highway that runs from I-270 west to Poolsville, just to show that, they're not an island. They are connected by a highway, and there's stuff along there as well, just so it's not so much of an island effect. I mean, and as long as we keep cutting the number of police officers here, the populations of Damascus and Poolsville will continue to decline.
We'll put that future connection across the Potomac too.
Yeah. Please, Robert, don't do that. Because long ago, 50 years ago, when I came to park and planning, we used to show things like that. And at that time, I was 6'1". And look at me now, a shell of what I used to be.
Gus.
Yeah, Steve.
I've seen this presentation before, and I think they have, about half of it left. I would suggest we let them get through it and then ask questions so we can see the whole thing.
Okay. Sounds like a good suggestion.
Okay, so for schools, I guess the second big recommendation that we'll just brief on right now is 2.3. As we've mentioned before, we're collecting these utilization premium payments funds from developers proposing units in schools that are showing to be overutilized. Those funds under the current policy can only be used for school capital projects that are intended to relieve or intended to increase capacity at the school or intended to relieve the students from the school that the funds were collected for. MCPS, until very recently, has rarely changed boundaries to relieve students to one school or another. So it's been easy to track this. But MCPS's recent practices have started changing, or recent plans have started kicking up on really trying to change boundaries when there is a surplus capacity available at a nearby school to relieve a school that is overcrowded, especially when it's like right next to it where the school boundaries touch. So we're trying to loosen up the language there for the nexus cause, so that the funds collected could be used for any school that's adjacent. And we have a list of adjacent schools that we publish in our school utilization report. We make it based on schools that have boundaries touching each other. MCPS staff has blessed that approach, saying that's a good way to nail down a list. So we're trying to say, even if there's a project that's increasing capacity, but doesn't specifically say which schools that they're going to relieve students from, if there are UPC funds collected in a school nearby where the boundaries touch, we're going to say, let MCPS use those funds. A lot of times the problem has been when we had school facility payments previously too, we have small pockets of money saved here and there that can't do anything anywhere. So we're trying to give a little more flexibility in that area. So if there are no questions, I guess we'll move over to the transportation policy recommendation. Darcy. Did we lose Darcy?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you. Just getting situated. Okay, for our transportation policy, we have 18 recommendations, but I'm going to highlight 2 of them for today. A lot of them are a little more in the weeds and are really focused on making the policy easier to use, easier to understand, more straightforward, and just fairer in general for across development applications. So the first one I want to talk a little more about the policy or recommended changes to the policy area. So here's the map that I'd shown earlier. These are the existing transportation policy areas, and here are the definitions for those, which we discussed earlier. But the red are really our downtowns, places with either current or planned high density and current or planned premium transit, which is Metro Rail, Purple Line, or BRT. The orange areas are our town centers and also the corridor focused growth areas where we expect to have planned premium transit. And then the yellow areas are our lower density areas. These are our residential neighborhoods that have community serving commercial areas. And the green area is the county's agricultural reserve, as well as our rural areas. It's worth noting that while we differentiate between green and yellow, there are very limited differences between how those areas are treated. For example, today the transportation impact tax is the same for both green and yellow areas. I don't think it was intended to be that way, but it came down to political decisions to keep those the same. This is recommendation. These are our recommendations to how to change those designations as part of this policy. We're recommending creating 3 new red policy areas. Again, these are our downtowns. These are also the areas that pay, when you're a red policy area, you pay the least amount of per unit impact tax. And you would also, you're not required to do a motor vehicle study. You're not required to study the motor vehicle impacts. So we're recommending 3 new policy areas. One is in the Great Seneca Life Sciences Center area. The next is what we're calling White Oak Village and Town Center. It's the northern portion of today's White Oak policy area. It's really the downtown portion of White Oak. And also a new one in the Rock Spring area. We are also recommending kind of expanding the orange designation to cover many of our corridor focused growth areas. So that includes Germantown, Montgomery Village, and the eastern side of Clarksburg, as well as Aspen Hill and Only Town Center and along US 29. And last but not least, we're recommending moving Damascus to a yellow policy area. We feel this really best represents existing conditions in Damascus, and it also acknowledges that while it's certainly not an urban center, it is a place where we've seen and expect to see some more limited growth. Do we have any questions on this one?
Can I back? And I'm going to try to stick to what Steve suggested so you guys can get to the thing. I think what would be, and I wanted to wait until you flipped the slide. I think what would be helpful here, because I think what I understood was this was 2020, this is going to be 2024, and you're showing the hatching. What I would suggest is that you change the colors of the hatches to red and orange so that you can go 1, 2, 3. So this would end up seeing White Oak in red and Great Seneca in red. Because I think what you're doing, you're saying these are changes. show the map with Damascus as yellow now as opposed to green, right? So take this map and make a third map that changes all of your hatches to solids.
Got
Does
it.
that make sense?
I appreciate that recommendation. Yes.
Right, yeah.
So that was not really a comment question. I wanted to see how you were presenting. I think that would help because I think you can really visualize this is the shift, but now this is what we're actually, so when 2028, when we're talking about this, you have the new map.
Yeah, then council will see Damascus is now changed. That will be big to the council.
Yeah, I think it'll be helpful to add those state highways on too. I really like that idea. So those will be in there next time too. So. Okay, I'm going to move on to the other recommendation I want to talk about if we're good on this one.
Yep.
Okay, so of the other ones I want to talk about are LATR exemptions. So as you know, as a policy, because growth and infrastructure policy is a policy, we can use it to help us reach our goals, including our housing goals. And one of our focuses of this update has been to think about ways that we can use it to help encourage and incentivize the type of housing we want in the places we want. So part of that is the policy area changes, and others are by kind of carving out exemptions from our typical requirements for development types that we're really looking to see. So this recommendation 3.11 is to expand one of our current exemptions. At the time, affordable housing units are okay. So when a development, sorry, I'm going to back up a minute just to back out and talk about a little bit about the LATR process to make sure I'm framing this in a way that makes sense. When a development application comes in, if it hits if it's over a threshold of a certain number of new trips that it's bringing to the area, it has to do this series of multimodal tests, which we call local area transportation review, which involves assessing the surrounding existing conditions around the site and coming up with a list of deficiencies. The development is then required to fix those deficiencies up to an amount that we consider to be proportional to the size of the project and to the impact of the project. Typically, that means that a developer would come in and fix curb ramps away, off-site curb ramps. Maybe a block away, there would be some curb ramps that needed that weren't up to code, or putting in a new sidewalk, and they would come in and actually do that construction. When it's not feasible for a variety of different reasons, it could be right of way is not available or some other reason, the county will instead accept a payment for the cost of what that improvement would have cost. Today, if someone can't do the construction, instead makes a payment, we allow an exemption for affordable units. So if you were building a development that had 30% affordable units, your payment, your mitigation payment would be reduced by 30% to account for those affordable units. Our recommendation is to expand that exemption so that it's also true for constructed improvements, so that you would only be expected to, you would get the same discount for constructed improvements as you would for this payment, as we feel that that's a fairer system. Recommendation 312 is a similar exemption. This is introducing a new one that would exempt multifamily units with 3 or more bedrooms from needing to do offsite mitigation, construction, or payment.
Just a question, is affordable housing, is that synonymous with MPDUs or is it broader?
It's nearly synonymous. There's the definition in the impact tax code, but which we're going by, but it means any legally binding affordable housing. So there are a couple other types that are not MPDUs, but sometimes they're used interchangeably.
It could be like a light tech project too.
A what?
A light tech project, a low income housing tax But, generally, the code defines affordable housing. MPDs are part of that, but there's other programs and policies that are fit.
And your exemption for 3 or more bedrooms, very wise. No developer who builds housing wants to build a 3-bedroom apartment building. They haven't wanted to do it for decades for good reason. So encouraging them to try to put in 3-bedroom apartments is great, exempting them, because nobody in their right mind would build an apartment building with 3 bedrooms.
That said, I'm still not sure that's enough. It's moving in the right direction, but there's much way beyond the off-site payments and what have you that goes into building a 3-bedroom unit. So.
And that's, we'll talk about, we have a
I
couple.
know, all good, but.
That's fair. So we brought this to, we brought all of our recommendations to the planning board, the transportation recommendations, where we did a work session with the planning board last week. And we also addressed testimony that we had received. On this one, 311, we received a number of proposals to further expand this. There were ideas about if you met a certain threshold of affordable housing, exempting that, then therefore be completely exempt from offsite mitigation. There was also a recommendation for kind of like a double exemption for deeply affordable units. We talked about it some with the planning board. They asked us to come back. We'll come back next week and just discuss it a little bit more. The board supported the recommendation as written. It seemed they were reluctant to expand it, but we will have another conversation about it next week.
Just wear them down.
Lisa, do you want to talk about
HOC housing? Is HOC housing fall under your affordable housing standard here? And HOC housing, where they're either doing it on their own or with a private developer or a joint project, that would include housing by HOC? Yes. Thank you.
Lisa, do you want to talk about some of the impact tax recommendations?
Sure. Just to give you a very brief primer on the impact tax recommendations, Darcy kind of set it up well, where she said we're looking for specific carve-outs that we think will advance county priorities, whether it's smaller homes, whether it's 3-bedroom units, whether it's office to residential conversions. We think that this policy can do a lot. We know that our impact taxes are high comparatively in the state, in the region, and anything that we can do to kind of make it a little bit easier to see the housing types we want is important. The first, impact tax recommendation I want to talk about is 4.3, and that's to offer 50% transportation and school impact tax discount to single-family attached and detached units that are small, 1,500 square feet or smaller. During the public hearing, we received a lot of testimony that said 1,500 is too small. It's not viable in this market. So when we have the work session on Thursday, we're going to go over that testimony with the board, and staff has revised its recommendations to kind of increase the square footage, not significantly, but a little bit more to make it viable. We looked at building permit data about like what's being built size-wise right now. We found that, and to be frank, there was nothing being built at 1,500. Even the MPDUs were a little bit larger.
Right.
So we're going to revise that recommendation for the board and when we go over it with them on Thursday.
Y'all have a figure in mind?
I was looking at the bottom 20% quintile of like what's being built now, and it's around like 1,800. So I'm thinking of 1,750 or 1,800. A lot of the building industry requested 2,000, so I thought maybe we'll meet in the middle between 1,500 and 2,000. Another, 4.5. There's currently a discount for 3-bedroom units in the infill school impact area on the school transportation side. We want to expand that current discount for 3-bedroom units, so it's a total impact tax waiver for 3-bedroom units and projects throughout the county and all multifamily units. And we think that this is a real, like you said, maybe it won't, move the needle significantly, but it can help. And we think that, anything that we can do to help to create these family-size units, which, there's only been, 900 3-bedroom units built over the past decade.
Right.
It's less than 4% of the rental housing stock that's been built. So we haven't seen a lot, but we think this can something that could maybe help make it a little bit more appetizing to build these types of units.
Literally just those units, not the whole building, or not the whole, that's right. So, okay.
And then finally, recommendation 4.6.
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
To Bob's point, just something to think about. And, you know, if you said an apartment building going up, I'm just gonna pick a number out of the air. You know, if 15% of them were 3-bedroom units, the whole building is exempt. I mean, just something to think about, because if you think about it, nobody's gonna build an apartment building with.
Yeah, well, let's
Okay,
let them
but you
finish, and we'll come
understand?
back. I have
Yeah.
some more comments.
Okay.
Sure, yeah, all the feedback you can give would be helpful. So for office to residential conversions, you know, I'm preaching to the choir, they're really expensive, they're hard to do. You know, currently office to residential conversions, they do get a credit for their existing use, for their new residential impact taxes. But, you know, sometimes there's still a significant impact tax charge. And, you know, the county, you know, has a really high office vacancy rate, and anything that we can do to make conversions, you know, easier, we think would be helpful. So we are recommending, if you go to the next slide, Darcy, exempt office to residential conversions from impact taxes.
Great.
Currently, as it's written, staff recommended that it's only for adaptive reuse or rehabilitation. It's not for demolition. But we heard a lot of testimony that, you know, demolition of office is also expensive. So we're also offering a recommendation, or updating our recommendations to give a 50% discount for if demolition is involved, just to make it a little bit easier for office to residential conversions in the county.
Excellent.
I think those are what I want to go over for impact taxes.
More on in the deck to keep going, or?
No, those are the, I think there's 3 big ones.
Okay, great.
So I'm going to piggyback, since Gus was just on this. And by the way, for everybody online, if you have a question, there's a little thing at the bottom where you can engage and put your hand up so Brian can watch and see whether or not somebody's got their hand up. Because I want to, you know, I know we've got Casey and Steve and a bunch of other people who may have questions on there. So let's make sure I would suggest that you become even more aggressive. I heard the 50% on 3 bedrooms. This is a 4-year policy. Okay, and I think our challenge is we constantly move the needle a little, move the needle a lot, and see if it actually makes a change. Go to what Gus was suggesting. If you deliver a building that's 15% 3 bedrooms, it's waived.
Whoa.
See if in the next 4 years, some of these things actually material. And by the way, meeting in the middle I heard the term meet in the middle. Okay, 1,500 didn't work, and the development community told you it was 2,000. Meeting in the middle doesn't work. Because the problem is the product. When I had to go build a garage in the city of Rockville, Rockville said my garage, I wanted X. They said Y. They said meet in the middle. I said, I'm not going to build the garage. You know, I mean, it was one of those things where until you got, ask the development community to show you the unit that they have that already exists, and then make sure it's the unit that you want. And if that's the case, incentivize it. Be aggressive. It's 4 years. And impact taxes here are how much of our overall budget? Did we figure this out? It's like 5 or 10%?
4% for transportation, 7% for school.
What? 4 and 7%. What? Well, make a change. Be aggressive. Go for 100%. Lean into it and see if it actually creates the shift. By the way, even in 4 years, you know this. It might take a year or two to get something entitled. See where you're at. See if it starts to change housing production. 4 years from now, if it's not right, course correct it. Hey, we moved this forward to 3 bedrooms and said, could we get 15% and get our 3 bedrooms? And 1 building came forward. You know, 20 buildings come forward. Hey, hang on, too aggressive. Grandfather those 20 in and pull back. But if you want to see housing growth in this county, you want to set ourselves apart. Be bold.
And
don't be shy.
And there are at least, let's get down to cases. There are at least 6 votes on the council where if you put stuff like that in front of them, you might be surprised and they go, yeah.
Give it a shot. Give it a try. That's what I would suggest, that we as a county need to be more visionary on that on the way in. Knowing that you're not touching this in tenor. This isn't Thrive 2050. This is the growth and infrastructure policy that this council has the opportunity, and many of these people, given the fact that we have a huge turnover of this now, 11, get the opportunity to sit on it again. Yeah. And hey, we're leaning in. We want, how many housing units are we behind? You said you wanted to hit 30, you're at 6, or 10 or whatever the number is, you're 2/3 of the way behind production of where you needed to be halfway through the decade. Make Montgomery County, you heard a lot of negative about whether or not we have rent caps and what have you. Lean into where you want to create housing growth and see if it works. And my personal guess is, even if you leaned in on the heavy end, you still won't get as much as you think. That's just my gut. And why not make a go of it? So that's, because 3 bedrooms are still so much. I don't think 15% is enough.
I'm just made this up, you know, it might be 25.
5.
or
No, a 3-bedroom unit is so hard to justify because of the cost, because of the expense. We're trying to serve those families. You know, I think where you're at with the 1,500 is like, you're trying to drive towards missing middle. You're trying to drive towards more smaller units. I mean, be really aggressive. If your development came forward with 1,500 or less, it's waived. We're not doing transportation. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. I think you need to really lean into, if you want to create product type. This is a guy who's sitting on 200 acres of land, and I can't deliver you missing middle because I can't make the economics work. There's nothing that you could give me either on growth and infrastructure, on impact taxes on either side that would still make me want to do it. The land in this county is simply too expensive. It's going to go to Frederick.
And I just want to add one other comment, which I know is in the back of your mind, but the subtext of all of this is, if you're from outside the county and this is all new, if you're a company builds big housing and they look at Montgomery County, the minute they hear what they just adopted rent control on housing, they don't even want to look at this. I mean, they're already gone. There's like no way. So to pick up on what Bob is saying, you need to be aggressive on this stuff, because you're in the hole already because the council adopted rent control on housing. So I just want, you know, and it's not a part of this. It's not a part of this, of course, but it is the subtext to everything out there in terms of housing development. There's a major residential developer that I've been dealing with, and the minute they read in the Washington Post and the Washington Business Journal, Montgomery County, Maryland adopted rent control on housing, they said, we don't even want to hear about your growth policy. We don't care. We're not touching that county. We'll go to Howard, we'll go to Arlington.
And the only thing that's good for us is the fact that Prince George's County is on the precipice of doing the exact same thing. And they've been told by another landowner in Prince George's County, like, don't go there. It's going to be a mistake. You want growth and you want development. You were ahead of Montgomery. I hate to say this, ahead of Montgomery County temporarily because you didn't have it. Now you're going to now. Okay, so you put yourself behind Montgomery County, which is behind, you know, Howard or Frederick or Anne Arundel or what have, for the guys that are doing stuff regionally. So anyway, Steve Robbins had his hand up. Brian, Steve, you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I guess piggybacking on this, I love the idea of going big. I think it's a great idea. And if it works, it could be, you know, successful. I have a question. I was actually talking to Lisa about this last night at another meeting, which is the affordable housing exception for offsite infrastructure improvements. And I'm curious, is this coming before the board this week or next week again?
We're going to return to that on the 20th.
Okay, on the 20th. And can you, I mean, I was one of the people that testified about this kind of stuff. And can you tell us two things? Number one, if you to me, it seems like a relatively easy concept to grasp and understand and support. I don't understand why there's a distinction made between, you know, if you provide a certain percentage of affordable housing, you're exempt from impact taxes, but we're not doing the support for this similar exception is getting, you know, questioned. And I know the board was interested in trying to come up with something. Can you give us a preview of what that might be?
So we're working on that, like right now. We'll that preview will need to be in our staff report, which we'll post by Friday. But I think the distinction comes down to really whether you're seeing like a built improvement on the ground or whether it's just, money that's going into a pot for countywide issues. And there's a concern that if you're not requiring any offsite improvements for these places, then you won't get, the better sidewalks nearby or the better crossings or maybe a traffic signal. And while there's the idea that like that could come through eventual public subsidy, there are a lot of needs in the county, and it's hard for individual projects to rise up and get attention. Whereas this is an opportunity to have those improvements actually built by the developer. So I think that's kind of the tricky spot of it. In terms of where the recommendation's gonna go, I was re-listening to the conversation, and it seemed that that the chair was certainly open to fully exempting mixed income communities from LATR requirements, because those are, at a minimum 50% affordable to lower amounts. There's like the deeply affordable part of that, plus the as in addition to the affordable component. And also, I mean, from just a regulatory standpoint, they have a really quick turnaround. So there would be other benefits to not having LATR requirements in that for those as well. So I see that one as one that we might propose. I'm not sure about the full exemption for it sounded like 25 sounded too low to the board.
Yeah. Okay, well, I definitely testified on the mixed income community, so I hear you on that, and I will see I'll read eagerly about the affordable housing. I wasn't as focused. I support that, but I was really focused in my testimony on the mixed income housing. So, thank you.
So I have a couple, you talked very much or briefly at the end about office to residential conversion. And I know that may be part of the growth and infrastructure policy, but I also encourage you to think about it outside the growth and infrastructure policy. You talked about demolition as being the trigger. The thing to be thinking about is the fact that demolition is actually negative on the energy spectrum, right? Because you're now destructively doing things. And part of the adaptive reuse of these buildings is you don't want to trigger too much to have to demolish if part of what you're trying to do is adaptively reuse. I think it's just simply the adaptive reuse of the building or in some form or component. Because I think what you may start to see in certain places, and I'm going to speak as a company that's just bought a building. Unfortunately, it's in Rockville and not in Montgomery County.
Oh, you mean the city limits?
It's in the city limits. Yes, I know. And I'm a Rockville resident, so I can tell you, I swore when I did something before, like I'm not going to do it again. I'm a glutton for punishment. But
you did that.
yes, I know. But I think the reason I'm mentioning this is, for example, the building has a parking garage, and the building has a garage that's of value, and I'm going to take down everything but the garage. So the destructive aspect is there. But if the skin of this building, this fair building, which the chamber is in, I think is at the servicer already, and this is, I'm picking on sorry, not the county, but the city here, but what is going to become of this building? And what is going to become, and you're going to have buildings in downtown Bethesda, in Silver Spring, and elsewhere. The simple adaptive reuse of that building. And it's going to come beyond just the GIP stuff, but what do you do from a tax perspective? Because you're going to lose the commercial tax base immediately because all these things are getting assessed down, and the county is sitting there going, oh my God, my assessments are going from 20 or 30 million down to 5. Or in the case of the Clark building, it went from 130 and it's going to go to 30. What's that going to do to you from a service perspective? But then also, how do you encourage somebody to come back and rebuild? Do we need to do TIFs? Do we need to do pilots? Do we need to ensure the fact that there is a recapture of the tax base? How do you incentivize somebody to put money back into a building to give it new life? So I'm just.
So let me answer that in one way, unless you had.
No, I can't wait to hear.
So we have, so Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez has been pushing the office to residential conversion. And pushing it from a perspective of, making it easier to permitting, to planning, looking at the zones that these buildings kind of are situated in right now, because not every office building is, is a good example to, or a good candidate to change to residential.
Very true.
So I think, Lisa, didn't we identify a certain age group of buildings? I think at some point we did.
Yeah.
A certain age group of buildings that really would qualify for those office residential conversions. I don't know that it got into the tax benefits that you're talking about, but it did look at, okay, we have a map of these buildings within the county, and how do we start incentivizing those buildings right now? Understanding that not everyone is wanting to do that, and understanding that some of these buildings may have other issues, associated with them.
And some of them are going to be in your red policy areas,
Right.
and those are going to be easier out of the gate. I'll say easier, but that's going to depend on floor plate and building and use and what have you. And there's going to be those in the sort of the fringe areas that are we'll call it your infill areas, because everything's an infill area, but isn't near transit and so it's going to feel like a suburban office building, and that is going to be a wholly and totally different challenge from what that is. And they do different things. The rent they generate are going to be totally different. What someone may or may not be willing to put into it to own an asset that would ultimately be in downtown Bethesda versus suburban Silver Spring. Yeah, yes. Well, the Rock Spring Park has had some surprisingly good successes with you have the age restricted product that's basically, well, what made it worthwhile? Probably that parking garage at the end of the day. The parking deck alone probably was so valuable to them. I think were there 104 million, I think was that one, but the parking deck, it being how many couple thousand parking spaces, meant that you didn't have to build parking. Right. Just cluster it near it. And there's another building that came forward fairly recently. I can't remember who owned that one. I think you all just recently approved as well. But that is an area, again, I'll call it the Bermuda Triangle for what it is. It's the traffic epicenter of our county. Right. Like all the roads. Are you on 495 or 270 or 270 or an extension of 495? Like everybody comes through here, and it's just it still works because of where you are, even if it doesn't have a transit hub. Right, because
I do think where we've seen the most success for the conversions is probably downtown. We've probably had 3 within the last 5-ish years that have come in. Most of those conversions are to condos; they're not to rental, which I think has worked out fairly well. But yeah, we'll see.
It's going to be much more on the office to residential. That's the piece that you need to focus on, and allowing for different, and so there's also groups out there that would argue that part of what you need to do is skew towards buildings that would allow for adaptively being part office and part residential as you move towards that. Because, if you have a building that's at, if it's at 50% occupied and you're trying to go up or down, you have a decision to make. Are you going to try to stick it out as office, or are you going to wait this out? And if you can find a way to actually start occupying a building as residential while it winds down as the office, and maybe it's a hybrid, that might be a strategy that would allow a building to not be obliterated or have to wait 5 years for every tenant to occupy. I see Stuart has a question, so I want to make sure that Stuart has an opportunity.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. Thank you. The recommendation, I think it's number 4.8, that would enable transportation impact tax credits for transportation improvements along state roads. Which day at the planning board will that be discussed? And what is your sense of the momentum one way or the other as to whether that recommendation will be supported by the board going forward to the council?
We're going to discuss that one this Thursday at the planning board, and my expectation is that the board, they've during our preliminary recommendations, they were expressing support for it, and I expect that support will continue, but we'll have to see.
Thank you. This Thursday. So it's this Thursday. Okay, thank you.
Other comments or questions from anybody online? Well, this has been extremely helpful, and we want to thank all 5 of you for taking the time. We know how busy you are. You got to deal with 5 planning board members, 11 council members. We can ignore the county executive. And,
This is being recorded, guys.
I don't care. He knows what I think. There's nothing new about it.
Not all of us think that well.
But the point is the council that decides all of this. That's the point. It's those 11 people that make the ultimate decision. And what you're doing in trying to guide the board and the council, those 16 people, we understand how difficult your jobs are. We get it, you know? And so we want to thank you so much for taking the time. Great presentation, very helpful. I just want to end with that and then turn it over to Gigi and Bob and Brian for anything else.
No, thank you. And again, I'd like you to think of us as a partner in this. You know, yes, we, the chamber, represent a broad spectrum of people. Sometimes it's real estate developers, sometimes it's large companies, a la, you know, Marriott or.
But if you look, if you all
look at the list
take a
over
look
here,
at
what
those
have you, but
companies that are on the board of directors of this organization, you're looking at medium-sized, large, and even small major employers in this county. They also live here, and their employees, their staff, their associates, their people, they're living here. They're going to the schools, they're on the roads. So if you just look at that up there, those companies, it's not just a corporation. Those are a lot of people who work and live here. So it's piggyback on what Bob is saying.
economic development, what do we care about? Economic development for this county and making sure, and moratoria removal was important, but everything that you do that puts this county on better footing than every other jurisdiction around us, because there's a lot of them, right? And that's what's important to us, is making sure that people want to come here, first and foremost, over across the river or at the edge of our boundary lines that, you know, for federal enclaves, but let's make us the beneficiary in the winter. And that's, we appreciate it. We see you as a partner in that, and that is what is important.
And Gigi, our president.
I want to say thank you. We always enjoy having you and having these discussions here at the chamber. I so appreciate your willingness to spend time with us and with our thought leaders that then in turn, you know, are going to be out in the community, business community and our entire community sharing this information. I do want to echo what both of our chairs here said, especially what a great opportunity to be bold, to really reach, because we are in a huge competition, and it isn't only the jurisdictions that border, you know, the ones that were outside the lines that we saw, but it's a global competition for our employers and the talent that they want to hire, and they've got to have a place to live. And so before people even think about coming here, they're going to look, you know, before they ever even get on an airplane to think about it, because this is really a race for the future. And are our kids going to live here? If we're going to invest in educating them, it would be nice if they came back and lived here and had jobs here. So it's very much, this is your designing our ecosystem. And so it matters to the future. And it's personal. I have 3 millennial kids. I want them. I've got 1 back, 2 to go. I'm counting on you all to make that possible. So no pressure.
Mr. Chair, hello, Gus?
Yeah, hi,
Can I
Steve.
just say one quick thing?
Yeah, Steve.
The benefit of our park and planning friends and those online that were not at our annual dinner. This is a semi-historic event, and I just want to publicly thank Gigi for her support over the many, many, many years, particularly with the Land Use and Infrastructure Committee. As you guys may not know, Gigi is retiring as of the end of this month, and it's going to be a huge gap to fill, but she's been really amazing. And I've known Gigi since she, you know, came to the chamber, and before all this, she was like a PTA fanatic. And then all of a sudden she came to the chamber, and she was like, you know, this high energy,
let's make this county amazing. And she has helped in so many ways, particularly with stuff that is not intuitively obvious or understandable. And Gigi, we're gonna miss you to no end, but just thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. See, that was very sweet of you. I appreciate it. I appreciated the very, very amazing surprise ending of annual dinner, which I'm still trying to process, that so many of you were involved in, you, Steve, and of course, Gus and Bob and Lowell, who's on this call. Thank you. I'm still overwhelmed by it, but you know, I'm just going to assure you this: I'm not moving away.
Right.
I am not moving away. I'm not flying to the moon with wings. I am hanging out. I'll still be in the community.
Right.
Mission driven. Always have been. Always will be. You all have my cell phone number. I'm a phone call away, and I'll always have a vested interest in the success of the chamber and our entire community. So rest assured of that.
And there's
Thanks.
precedent here because we have two former chairs of the planning board that are still involved in this stuff and on this call.
Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
you know,
Well said.
God Almighty, because you all deal with this. Believe it or not, imagine everything you're doing, right? Well, we had to do it when this was invented in '86. You know, when we did that, it was called the annual growth policy. The operative word being annual. We had to do this every year. Now imagine that. And that was the way it was from '86 through the '90s to the turn of the century, every year. And then, of course, it was 2. Now it's 4. And if you guys keep at it, it'll be 6. It'll be 6.
That's the next recommendation.
There you go. Put that in a footnote. None of the 11 council members will notice it. Just slip it in the resolution of adoption. Boom. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.